Welcome to the ninth Biennial Critical Code Studies Working Group. I'm Mark Marino at USC,
And I'm Jeremy Douglas at UC Santa Barbara.
and we'd like to give a special thanks to our co-organizers and sponsors, particularly Lear Colin Pacheco. This working group, we have a fantastic lineup for you. We have 4 planned weeks. Week number 1, we have Where is the Critical in Critical Code Studies? Week 2, we're going to be looking at AI in Critical Code Studies. Week 3, we're going to look at code as cultural heritage. And in week 4, we're looking at new work and new directions.
This time, for the first time, our working group is also going to be exploring a series of featured books over the course of several weeks. We'll start off with 44 Esolangs, The Art of Esoteric Code by Daniel Temkin, then move to Intellivision, How a Video Game System Battled Atari and Almost Bankrupted Barbie by Braxton Soderman and Tom Belsdorf. And then look at Output, an anthology of computer-generated text, 1953 to 2023, by Lillian Yvonne Bertram and Nick Montfort. Alongside that, we're going to be having featured code critiques. While people will be creating code critiques spontaneously throughout the course of the working group and also contributing ones that they proposed during the planning session, we are expecting Moritz Mayer to give us a code critique on Oberon by Nicholas Wirth, 1987. We're looking forward to Jeff Schrager's code critique on OPL1 by Joseph Weizenbaum, 1964. And we're getting a group of code critiques from the Software Heritage Foundation selections from the UNESCO Source Code exhibition that is opening later this month in Paris. We're very excited about that.
Be sure to jump into all the discussions, to join code critiques, to start your own code critiques, and get to know your fellow participants.
So, those welcomes aside, what about this discussion? In this discussion, we'll be talking about where is the critical in critical code studies, the topic of Working Group Week 1. And we're welcoming the critical code studies community to join us in thinking about this question. Not just what is the critical, but where do we locate it in this kind of work? Mark, how did we get to this question?
Well, I feel like it started at the beginning, Jeremy, when we were talking about the foundation of this field many years ago. We you asked me the question, hey, what if you just called it code studies, or why can't it just be code studies? And this was around the time when, as you remember, there were a lot of other studies that were in formation. There was, and still is, software studies, platform studies, and they didn't have the word critical attached to them. But critical was very important to the project we were talking about. So we're talking about critical in terms of a hermeneutics of suspicion, interpretation, cultural critique, or intervention.
Mm-hmm.
But what we really wanted to figure out how to make possible is cultural critique at the site of an attentive and well-researched close reading of source code.
So, this idea of bringing the code and critical together, it's an opportunity, but it can also be a dialectic problem. And it's a problem that has a kind of a history. There are positive arguments that people coming from critical disciplines or people coming from technical disciplines make about knowledge formation, but those sometimes experience a kind of a two cultures conflict.
So, what are the stakes and what are the two sides?
Mm-hmm.
Well, on the one hand, we've got the critical, I'm going to group in terms of continental philosophy or philosophy in general, and on the other side, like a technological history. Um, so in their extreme forms, I think we could sort of parody these as I don't know, woke interpretation on the one side, and then the other extreme side would be like a computational fetishism or nostalgia studies.
Yeah, these uh, these two positions on like how knowledge work, they have critiques of each other across the divide, right? You could say on the one hand, well, when you bring a cultural studies interpretive framework, that's obscuring in some ways the fact, right? The grounding particulars of the code itself. You already know what you think. You have an agenda. There's this larger moralizing story that's being told. So you're not actually engaging with the details. But of course, engaging with the details itself can be its own kind of a flattening where you're so focused on the fact of the material that you are no longer interested in what it means or why or who should care.
So what again, I'm going to create one of these sides a little bit exaggerated. So I'm going to argue that sometimes in the technical emphasis, there's an inherent conservatism. So it focuses on the technology or the history, a documentation without critique, an exhibition and preservation of the past. It focuses on recovery and retrieval that starts to be at the service of like an industrial or military archival research, or I don't know, again, at the extension of this is a celebration of innovations in an untroubled progress narrative.
There's the corollary to this, right? The sort of antithesis to this thesis would be that cultural studies, especially continental philosophy, the humanities at large, when we think about post-structuralism, deconstruction, and its stakes, identity, race, class, gender, and sexuality, the environment, psychology, the post-colonial. We think of all of these field formations around humanistic knowledge, and we could say, well, at some point, don't these things which come out of interpretive disciplines also often, routinely, historically, reject the grounding fact of the code or the technical object itself? They say, well, instead of my facts being untroubled by your cultural context, my cultural context is untroubled by your facts, right? And this kind of antithesis is where people say, well, these were disciplines that were supposed to originally be grounded in a kind of post-structuralist and postmodern semiotics that grew out of hermeneutics in the detail, but now they're coming unmoored from the site of close reading. You talk about code and software, but you're not really looking at it.
And again, but the critical creeps back in, or it necessarily we invite it back in because on some level, when you're looking at the technological and you're doing these close readings, it's never just sort of interpretation willy-nilly. There are stakes beyond this. I think at this cultural moment we can feel this, right? Technology it gets designed or co-opted by powerful interests, corporations, military, state, all part of projects designed to control our behavior or profit off of it, to surveil us, command and control operations. And and the question is in that world where is a hierarchy, where there are the high priest specialists who don't always feel that way, who understand the way this technology works. Are they the only people who get to critique it? Um,
Well,
okay, go
this
ahead.
actually does remind me of a story you were telling me, Mark, recently about your thinking about some of the events of the science wars, because of course that idea that there have been affirmative moves repeatedly to say, yes, we are the only people who get to talk about these objects.
Well, I mean, not everybody knows this story probably at this point, but so catch up on the science wars, I guess. The recap previously in the science wars, there were there was a moment in the 90s where people in the humanities were starting to learn about, let's say, things like theoretical physics, quantum physics, and it seemed like it was vibing with what we thought about in terms of post-structuralism and decentered knowledge, and again, these ideas seem like they played very nicely together. Okay. Well, not everybody was so happy about that. So there's this famous Sokol hoax where he gets published this parody paper that performs a post-structuralist interpretation of quantum physics and does some hermeneutics, but it's all hokum. It's all meant as a big prank to show just how ridiculous these these invading humanities scholars are as they try to dabble in the world of science that where they should just stay in their lane, right? And I felt like a very similar thing happened in the world of critical code studies. So our early critical projects, again, when I think about my objects of study early on and other people looking at code studies, there was, we were looking at the transborder immigrant tool, or I looked at the Anna Kournikova worm and was interpreting that in the context of, or as a similar cultural logic to the spread or the enforcement of heteronormativity, right? Okay, so then a group of language scientists, when they came across this paper, computer language scientists, um, decided that it just felt so incensed that it was a ridiculous application of highfalutin theoretical language coming to invade their realm, this practical realm and this theoretical realm that where they had specialization and where they had expertise, um, just for the sake of I don't know, bringing culture into a place where culture did not belong, or cultural critique in a place where it didn't belong. So anyway, to bring us back, I felt like at that point that sort of poured a bucket of ice water on the critical side of things, at a time when uh, just the field was just getting started.
It really reminds me at that time that after Sokol, things like the postmodern essay generator were coming out. You know, Markov chain-based parodies of cultural studies academic writing, especially postmodern academic writing, saying, the emperor has no clothes, there's no meaning here, like non-human systems could simulate the texture of these contentless arguments. And so it's very different from our current LLM transformer AI moment, where non-human textual generation has kind of become broadly normalized and instrumentalized, at least at the corporate level. But at that moment, the fact that of the essay passing or not passing was meant to be a kind of a parody of um, the cultural studies hype machine, right? Um, to carry on with that thought, Mark, when I think about 2011, 2012, Alan Liu's essay, Where is Cultural Criticism in the Digital Humanities? I think about kind of the antithesis to that critique, right? Which is that uh, for Liu in that piece, um, he says, um, he says, the digital humanities have been oblivious to cultural criticism, essentially saying that that DH, to the extent that it had become apolitical, aphilosophical, even a-interpretive to some extent, had sort of ignored advances in humanistic knowledge and discourse since 1968, I think he said. He says the lack of cultural criticism blocks the digital humanities from becoming a full partner in the humanities, and suggested that the field, in productive ways, engage with the trouble and think about helping to broaden our entire conception of the idea of instrumentalism and the technological. It's a call that I think resonates in some ways, rather than saying, get your humanities out of my technical details, saying like, why are you not applying your humanities to technical details enough? Right? I'm seeing lack of engagement here.
So that recollection reminds me of another really influential piece of writing on my work, which is Tara McPherson's "Why Are the Digital Humanities So White?" And in that essay, which largely talks about the development of the Unix operating system, in about that same time we're talking about, right? In the 60s, she writes, the difficulties we encounter in knitting together our discussions of race or other modes of difference with our technological productions within the digital humanities or in our studies of code are actually an effect of the very designs of our technological systems, designs that emerged in post-World War II computational culture. So she's arguing that this divide between our ability to think about culture and our technology is by design to some extent, right? And
Hmm.
um
Hmm.
and I don't know, like in some ways you could see this separation of the critical from the technical, I don't know, as a form of like intellectual redlining.
Yeah, very much. And in that way, crossing those lines is the call, right? Not just for an interdisciplinary field in general, but it's a kind of manifesto like call to say it's difficult to bring these things together, but so valuable. Let's deconstruct the binaries. Um, and so, in that kind of synthetic step that responds to the thesis and the antithesis, we did ask the question, how do we bring cultural criticism and code together at the site of interpretation? What are the key instances out there where this happens, and how does it happen successfully? What do different middle grounds look like? Are there best practices to navigate these binaries, or just think outside or beyond them? And what are the real pieces of work that people have done that seem to intervene in this discussion?
And I want to underscore that notion of discussion because I think obviously Jeremy and I wouldn't have been organizing these working groups for so many years if we didn't find them. The true value of this approach is in the conversations with people with different disciplinary expertise, looking at one object or various objects together. These are discussions that inspired, or that's what out of which grew Ten Print, the book, and also a forthcoming book from MIT Press called "Inventing Eliza" about the first chatbot system. And
Mm-hmm.
both of which, by the way, got their start in critical code studies working groups.
Yeah, there's so much happening in critical code studies that we couldn't possibly enumerate the bibliography of all the work. We've mentioned some featured code critiques. We've mentioned some books that we'll be featuring. There's a new Digital Humanities quarterly special issue coming out shortly of critical code studies work, the second special issue, and that's yeah, and I think we should, when we're asking this broader question about where is the work and what is the work, we should shout out some of this amazing and exciting work that hopefully we'll also be discussing in the next few weeks. I'm thinking of Brianna Betton's uh, polysemicolon novice programmers and Java keywords, Kevin Brock's naming in code as rhetorical strategies, and Matt Burton and Joris Van Zundert's Defactoring the Pace of Change.
Not to mention Evan Buswell's The Epistemology of Code, Zachary Horton and Levi Berner's Playing the Gap, and Zachary Mann's Reading Note G, Ada Lovelace and the Clerical Labor of Code Work.
And finally, we should mention Jeffrey Morrow's Counting Feeling, Affect Theory, and Sentiment Analysis in TextBlob, and Katrine Meldgaard Kerr's and Mace Ohala's Reading Code Aloud.
So, also, by the way, I should put a little plug in for the this summer's Retro AI Symposium, where we can continue these discussions in person. And there's a special issue of AI and society on critical code studies and AI that should be coming out in the next year or so. Um, so what we're asking from you, of course, are where do you see works that scholarly and creative that bring together these two sides? Um, can our critical code studies community and the working group brainstorm or identify where and how these examples already exist throughout our scholarship? Of course, this will be a site where this very working group will be a site where this happens.
And in the discussions that follow, we're inviting everyone to weigh in, particularly with examples of discussions of code objects where one side or the other is dominant, is balanced, or where maybe where something is more needed, or where something is particularly elegantly illustrative of these kinds of synthesis. How can we ideate what forms our work has taken and is already taking, and what forms they might take in the future? So we're coming back to the question, where where is the critical in critical code studies? And we want to thank you and say that we're looking forward to a great working group this week over the next 4 weeks. Please join the discussion.